So let's start creating our coin face by going into the material tab, which you can access by pressing M, and that is going to allow us to model our quarter. All right, navigation is pretty easy, so you should first start by making a plane, putting it in your scene. And if you right click on where these three little brackets are at the bottom where the grid, you can center your plane to that. In the material tab that you can access by pressing M, you need to create a standard shader, then navigate to wherever on your desktop or in your file your coin reference is. So I'm just going to select the front face of the coin, select that, and then drag that dot and then connect it to the base color map dot. And at the top, I can choose to show it on the material, and then I'm going to assign it to my plane with that down arrow. So once I've done that, I can go into my material or go into my viewport, and then I'm going to rotate it in the front view so that the coin is facing the front of our front camera. All right, and if you hit F3, it should show you the shaded or the edged faces view. All right, so in my plane menu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down that drop down tab in the modifier panel, and I'm going to look for the UVW map, and I'm going to throw it onto my plane so that I can adjust my image. And this is going to make sure that my image is fitting perfectly on that plane. And the way to do that is you just need to scroll all the way to the bottom, and you're going to click a button that says Bitmap Fit. And when you click that button, you're just going to navigate right back to where your coin is, and then it's going to fit it right onto that plane. And then I can go back into my plane parameters and then just reduce the size of the plane so that I have no extras, because what it's going to do is it's going to repeat that. So if I click shift and drag, I can drag out another copy of this, not an instance. I'm going to drag out another copy, and then I'm just going to do the same thing when I get into my material editor. I'm going to do shift drag after selecting both of them, then go into that second image and then navigate back to the back image of that. All right, and then I'm going to go in there and apply it to my material and then show the material on the object. All right. So right now I've got my two references. They have been now cropped appropriately to their image planes, and I'm pretty much ready to start modeling. For the most part, I think that they are good to go, but in some instances, the back plane might not match with the coin. So what you can do again is, go into that UVW map and just bitmap fit it on again to make sure that it's right. I didn't just because I knew it was right on this model, but for the future reference, it might not be. So just keep that kind of thing in mind. All right. So the next part of this is to go into your object properties, and where it says show frozen is gray, you want to uncheck that for both of your models. All right, make sure that show frozen in gray is turned off, and then what you can do is then freeze the selection. And what that allows you to do is it allows you not to be able to select the image at all. You can't select it. You won't be able to affect it because you don't want that your background kind of moving around while you're trying to create. So now we're going to start by creating our cylinder, because this is our base shape, because the most important thing for any of these models is to just block out our main shapes. So I'm going to block out my cylinder, and I'm going to move it in place. All right, and if you hit Alt and X, you're going to go into your X-ray mode. Alt and X, and that there will give you your X-ray mode. All right, so using that, I can then move my coin into place, go into my parameters, scale it if I need to. All right. So now you should just be kind of worried about blocking in all the shapes. Nothing crazy about detail. I'm just going to go and I'm going to reduce those height segments that are in the parameters. I don't need 5. I need 1. The sides, I'm going to go back and forth because I still have to make the ridges. So I'm going to leave it base for now. And then just kind of move around to get in everything else while this is in place. So just making a few touches here and there, making sure it's on the reference, reducing the radius, just making sure that it fits in that in the circle of the quarter. And then I also reduce the height of the quarter as well, just because I felt like it was getting a little too chunky. Okay, so the next step would be to start creating our text. So there's a few steps that it takes to create the step. The first step is to just go into your standard primitives, click the text plus, not the regular text. And then if you drop down into the parameter section, you can start to type in the text. So I'm going to start with the top and work my way down. So I'm going to start with the United States of America. And whenever you're done typing it out, you can then just click anywhere on the screen and it's going to place your text wherever you click. And what I'm trying to do right now is figure out the font, and the font that I use for this is Times New Roman. It's the closest to the font because I don't think you're going to find the actual money font that, just because of, I think, counterfeiting laws and things like that. So Times New Roman is going to be the closest that we are going to get to. It looks very stately, and in that we can then go into our geometry section, and then we can start adding a little bit of flair to it. Right now it has no depth, so I'm going to throw a little bit of extrude on it in the geometry tab, and then I'm going to go and add a bevel to it. And the bevel I'm going to add is going to be the concave bevel. You can scroll through everything else to see what they look like and use them for your later projects, but I mean, for what we're trying to do, the concave bevel is what's gonna work. So I'm just checking them out myself to see what different kind of bevels that exist. That's the convex one, and that's the concave one. And what another thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to then reduce the bevel height of that so that we're getting something smoother, something cleaner. It looks good and it's able to bend and deform properly. So now in your modifier tab, you can start to place your text. I want to kind of place like the S on the S just so that I have kind of a marker for the size comparison. And then you can just reduce the size. So now after you reduce the size, you can tell that your bevel is way too big and it makes everything too round. So you can increase it a little bit and then start to mess around with your bevel depth and your bevel profile. So you want to mess with this to get yourself something that looks tight, something that looks soft, because this is going to be something that we cast our normals from, and it's going to look good in the long run. All right, so that's what you're working towards, is you do these steps early and you don't have to worry about them in the later stages. So I also then reduce the height of it, the extrusion height, so that it matches something closer to how far the text would be coming out of that that coin. So I just go again and I make sure that my S is aligned and they're relatively the same size. And after that, you can then throw a bend modifier. So you go into your modifier tab and you throw a bend modifier onto the object. And this is going to allow us to bend it the way that the United States of America is bent in this image. All right, so you're gonna want to put 90 on your angle and 90 on the direction, and then in your bend axis, you just want to flip around to see which axis you need. And for this to make it happen, it was the X axis, and my bend angle wasn't enough, so I just went ahead and started cranking it up more. Just crank it up until you get it about approximately right to where it is. And you see that black stuff? That stuff we're going to address a little later on. It's not going to affect anything right now, but later on down the pipeline, when you want to bake out your normals, it will definitely affect our normals and how those edges are triangulating everything. So I'm just going back to see if it's something that I can fix with my extrude profile, and for the most part I can fix some of it, but the rest of it will have to be fixed manually, and I'll show you how to do that a little later on as well. All right. So yeah, you just want to mess with the axis, leave the direction at 90, and just make sure the bend is correct. And I'm guessing that on the actual quarter, there's a bit of skewing from the picture because it's probably taken from a camera, so it's not going to be perfect. So for mine, I'm going to do just that. All right, so here's one of the manual ways where you can fix the geometry issues, that black stuff that's happening. What's happening is there is not enough geometry to translate that bend. So when you see that, you can see that it's trying to connect one of those vertices, but they're crossing each other, and you're going to get that black line. So what you can do is throw an edit poly modifier on there, add yourself an edge, and then you can connect from that edge or that vertex to that vertex, and you can clean that up. And that's something that you're going to have to do for every single problem issue that you're going to run into when it comes to making your text. And this is part of the cleanup effort whenever you're using these modifiers, because our geometry isn't properly triangulated. There isn't quads in them. So those are essentially the no-no-gons that I've been telling you about. Those are n-gons and shapes that they don't have any triangulation, so the computer doesn't really know how that is supposed to translate without the proper geometry. So we just kind of fix that up, and what we can do from then is once we have our United States of America text, I kind of place it in the right spot, and then you can just start shift dragging it down. And you know, when you shift drag it down, you're just making a copy of it and not an instance, because you don't want it to override anything you're doing. So I'm just kind of right now just going back and forth and connecting some of those edges to see, you know, if I'll get the same result. And all you have to do is you got to add an edge, all right, and then hit connect, and that should take care of that. All right, so for the most part, our geometry is good. So now I'm just hitting shift and dragging down, and I'm going to make myself a copy of that, and I'm going to go into my text plus. I just selected those two modifiers, collapsed them on it. I don't want to have to go into the text panel again. I just have to go here and then retype in whatever my text says. So it says $quarter. I'm going to type that out. And it's essentially rinse and repeat. You throw a bend modifier on there, 90-degree angles in a 90-degree direction, and then you see what way it needs to bend. All right. You figure out the axis and then you bend it in the X. And now that it's bent in the right direction, you just go ahead and pull that bad boy down, and then you just place it in place to make sure that it fits. And what you're gonna see is sometimes the text isn't gonna fit when it comes to the kerning and the leading of the text. And the kerning refers to how much space is in between each text, and the leading is if there's text on top of each other, how big that space is. So what you can do is in the text plus, you can go into your tracking, which is essentially the kerning, and you can space that out. And that's what I'm doing right now, so that the spacing is accurate to the spacing in our reference image. All right, so these are the little things that sell the believability of the quarter and make it look more real. And once you go back into your bend modifier and you hit 1, you can actually affect that gizmo. And those little things, that yellow bar is called a gizmo. And that gizmo can be manipulated to get you more fine-tuned movement or fine-tuned adjustments for your text. So now I'm just kind of playing around to make sure my text fits better, looks good. And now that it looks good, I can just shift drag up again, make a copy of it. All right. And this time, since nothing is bent, I can just delete my bend modifier and leave it that way. Nothing else is bent in there, so this is fine. This is the easy part. All right. So with that said, let's type out our liberty. Liberty, vive la liberté. All right, and we're gonna place it. We're gonna place it right on the reference image where the liberty is, and we're gonna mess with the tracking, which is essentially the kerning a little bit, and then the size, so that we have something smaller that fits what we're looking for. All right, now our liberty is looking better, looking right. Maybe reduce that tracking a little more. All right. Make sure that it lines up. Okay, now that we've made sure that it's lining up, we're going to mess with a little bit of the tracking and the size again to make sure we're just getting it as accurate or as close to accurate as possible without breaking any of our counterfeiting laws. All right. And, because of our counterfeiting laws, we really can't do a lot when it comes to money. Like there's a thing where you can't Photoshop any kind of currency. You can't scan it into stuff. It won't even let you scan it. It won't even let you bring it in. So yeah, there's a lot of weird things with counterfeit laws. So this is kind of a little fun exercise to do in vain of that. All right. So just shift drag once again. You guys probably get the process by now. You're just shift dragging and typing your new text in God we trust. And now I think we're gonna have to mess with the leading of the text because it's not going to fit. It's either gonna have too much space or not enough space, and that's something we're gonna have to remedy whenever we get to that stage. So just move your text in place. All right, move your text in place. Then you're gonna fix the size of your text in the parameters. After you fix the size, you're gonna want to move it into place. So I'll start with the in, kind of get that feeling right, looking right. And a lot of the times, if it feels right, I think if it looks right is more important than it actually being right. The only time it needs to actually be right is if something's going to get printed, or you're going to do 3D molds or 3D sculpts, or they're for manufacturing. So yeah, that's the leading, and that's going to affect how much space is in between. And now that we've gotten that right, it looks good. Now we can, duplicate it one more time. And now all we need is that D on the front, and we've pretty much knocked out the text on the front of this coin. And just like that, it's that easy to kind of get from nowhere to you're somewhere making stuff happen. That easy, that fast. It's not rocket science. It's just knowing where the tools are and using the appropriate tools for the task at hand. All right. So I just go around and check everything to make sure everything's in place, everything's working and looking correct. And this is essentially part of the blocking process. So you're just blocking out all the bigger shapes. You're not really worrying about the fine toothy stuff right now, but you're more about blocking out the base shapes and how everything is going to feel. So yeah, you can take a break and come back and do your thing, and we're going to continue on the process. You can pause the video, come back, and get the rest of this model knocked out. And for this model, this is the high poly model we're making. The high poly model is the one that you can use in film, for advertising, for game, different things like, well, not for game, but for film and advertising and stuff like that. We will make a game-ready low poly version that is usable, but for this part, it's mostly about the film aspect of it, the high quality looking stuff. So before we tackle the head of our first president, we are going to now go into our line properties, and we're going to just block it out. And that's the easiest way to kind of get something in here without detailing or anything like that. And it's really easy to kind of just start by going into the line properties, and then just start in your front view. Make sure you're in your front view before you start doing any of this. You just want to start clicking and putting those lines on, if that's that's the next step. So before we even do that, I'm trying to make a decision on which way to go first. If we, just knock out all the text first, or we do some of the interior stuff. And I think I decided, okay, well, let's just knock out all this text stuff. So what you do is you just it's the same process as earlier, where you just kind of select the top two modifiers, and you delete those, get those out of there, and then you start to type in your font. So this next font is the Texas 1845, and if you notice that the bend modifier on there is super jacked up, so I'm probably going to end up just cutting it out of there and just starting from my text plus base. All right, and I don't know if the 1845 works well with the Texas font. I can't remember, because I'm recording the audio after, not while I'm doing it. So I think I might just separate those two and have them on their own individual layers or individual objects, and then bend them separately. And the thing about modifiers is you can copy modifiers from one stack to the next. So if you want something similar to that, you can just copy that modifier on down. So moving on, just once again, just cutting out that useless modifier that we already have on there. What we're going to do is try to change our text. So you pretty much get it at this point, which is rinse, repeat. If you don't know how to do any of this stuff, you can just rewind the video and go back to where I talk about how to get to that text plus, which is in your standard primitives. It's the little button at the bottom in that section. So yeah, just typing in this stuff. And because of the size difference, I think I'm going to decide to separate these two as well, because the bend modifier isn't going to work the same on both of them, given their size differences. So that's something that you have to definitely take into consideration as well. They might not have the same leading, they might not have the same kerning, so you might just want to go ahead and separate them, and that's exactly what I do. I separate them just because, you know, the size is different, the weight, the kerning, the leading is going to be different, so you might want that fine, you want to be able to do it with like a fine tooth comb, kind of definitely get it as specific as you possibly can. So don't make these instances. If you make them instances, if you make a change to one, it's going to affect the other one. So you want to make them copies of each other and not instances. I'm going to repeat that over and over. Copies, not instances. There are certain situations where you want an instance, and we're going to use an instance when we create the rope. But for these individual texts that are different from each other, you want to use copies. All right, now we're typing in our 2004, and then we can just scale that up, and it's only got a slight bend on it, so it's not going to be anything too crazy. And you know how to add the bend. You go into your modify tab, you hit that drop down modifier list, and then you just add yourself a nice little bend. Nothing too crazy, just simple stuff. You just got to know where this stuff is, and you should be good to go. Once you find the location and practice, you'll just get familiarized with it, and you'll know what to do off instinct rather than, you know, having it be such a laborious task. All right, so just start kind of scaling it up and bending your stuff in place. Sorry there's so many stops in there. I'm pretty sure I was just getting some water or something. A little thirsty out here. All right, so let's add our bend modifier to the e pluribus unum. Right, we add our angle. And this part is pretty much straightforward, so I'm just gonna let this kind of go and you guys get the point. It's all the same. Throw your bend modifier on there and you let it do its thing. Right? All right, so I'm just gonna let this kind of go. You guys can watch, pause, rewind, rewatch, pause, rewind, just to get how all of this works together. All right, I'm gonna catch back up with you guys whenever we start placing our points and making our star or the Texas or the man on the front of the coin. Once again, super straightforward, just editing the text, editing the leading, which is the space between the text, and the kerning, which is the space between the text. The leading is this space up and down. Kind of misspoke. And that's something new, is you can align it. If you hit that drop down, you can align it, and I just aligned it to the left justification. And then other than that, that's pretty much the only thing that's different here. Now you just kind of adjust the size to make sure it fits. All right, and since we need a little more kerning, I'm gonna up that percentage till we get there. So all in all, everything's relatively simple so far. This is the easy part. If you haven't done it yet, go ahead and add the bend modifier to your Texas font as well. And like I said before, I didn't think I was going to keep them together just because it's easier to edit them separately because they are similar, but they're doing two different things. So I just went ahead and separated them and added my proper text to it. All right, that feels a little better already, but with some tweaks, it could probably look a little bit better. So you should take this time to kind of evaluate your text, make sure everything's looking the way it's supposed to. Make sure everything feels right, fits on the model properly. All right, so let's jump into the creation of our Texas logo. So if you go into your splines tab and you select the first line, you got to make sure you're in the front view and you can start just kind of plotting those points. And I would avoid making that peak I just made, but later on you can delete it, and I delete that little peak part just because that's where the star is, and it was just an oversight on my part. But I just go through and I start just plotting these points, as many as I can, trying to get the shape but not going too crazy with it. You want to just kind of amalgamate the shape, kind of an average of what the roundness is going on. You don't want it to be too loose, but you don't want it to be so tight that you can't tell that there are verts in between all of these. So I'm just kind of going around making my shape, and you can zoom out using the middle mouse and just kind of getting the big shapes, because later on we're going to go ahead and essentially take this in a ZBrush and retopologize it in there, decimate it, or dynamesh it is I think what they call it in there. So you can dynamesh it and get some proper topology on this stuff so that whenever you bring it back in here, it looks good, and whenever you try to cast the normals, you don't get any funky behavior going on. And as you can see, I'm just kind of winging it and just taking it as it comes, and I'm the picture's a little low quality as well, so some of those peaks and valleys are the picture's artifacts. So I'm just kind of judging off of what's really going on in that negative, that white area and the gray area, not necessarily the black, because the black will kind of trick you into thinking that these are peaks and valleys that you need to draw. So there's kind of a fine line between too much and not enough. So that's kind of what you have to figure out for yourself. So now I've got that. That's what it looks like. And once I enclose my spline, it'll ask me if I want to. I'll say yes, and then I'll just throw an edit poly modifier right on top of it. So now we've got our shape. All right, so the shape is... Now that the shape is made, we're just going to go ahead and that's what I'm trying to do right now, is get rid of that kind of peak that's going on right there. All right. And now that we've got that works, that looks good. So when it comes to adding thickness to the outline of our shape, I can throw this edit poly on, and after this edit poly, you can also throw on a shell modifier, and the shell modifier will essentially give you an even side on both extrudes. So it's going to extrude it from either the inside or the outside, giving you what is a shell. So the next step for us is to go ahead and create the star. But before we create the star, we are going to create the rope on the side, and we're going to use the mirroring technique, so we only have to do the work one time. And to start creating this box, the first thing you're going to need to do is grab yourself a box. All right, you're going to grab yourself a box, and you're going to just in your front view still create the shape of the box. You're going to drag out, and what I like to do is go right onto the surface of the rope and try to find an area that defines the thickness the best. But you know, you can definitely start however you would like to start it. So I also count the edges of the box so that I know how many edge loops I need in there. All right. So yeah, just go ahead and create your box. Make sure it's a rectangular box, and whenever you start creating that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward from there. You're gonna create the box, place it where it needs to go, and once again, if you hit Alt X, you can definitely make it X-ray. So just make sure you have your box in line, everything's set to go, and you can then start messing with the height, the width, and the length of the box. So I kind of just turn it around so that I get a better perspective view, or it's more of the orthographic view of what's going on. So now I can place it. I hit F again to go back to my front view, and I'm just increasing it to match the width of that rope. So whenever I get that accurate as possible, now I can start and go into my edit poly modifier and, start adding my ridges to it. But I've already went ahead and counted the amount of ridges that need to be on the rope, and I can add that in length segments. So right now there's only one length segment, one width segment, and one height segment, but you can definitely go ahead and add those length segments to the rope to get the effect that we're looking for. So that magic number for the length segments is, I think, around 26. It's around that area. So I'm going to double check. I'm going to just count again to make sure I'm not missing any of them. Because the more accurate you get these little kind of details, the better it'll look in the long run. The more it's going to be easier to fool the eye, so to speak, because, little things like this are correct. So the actual length is, I guess, 33. So that's the amount of length segments I added to it. Don't add width segments. Don't add height segments. So from here on, we can go ahead and just add our edit poly modifier to the stack. And in my edge selection, I can just hit F3 to show my wireframe mode, and I hit Control and then I drag marquee up to select all those edges, and then I loop them around. So once I loop them, you see that it's looped completely around the rectangle, and from there we can add an extrude modifier. And once we extrude, we need to reduce our extrusion by a little bit, pull it in. All right, and you want to get it to where you see that it's kind of matching that silhouette of the rope behind it. All right, so you don't want to go too extreme, but now I just throw on a turbo smooth so I can see what it's going to look like before I continue the process. So I'm just going to go back and forth. So what I'm going to do is hide my turbo smooth, and I'm going to just select every vertice on the right side from the top to the bottom. All right, now that I do that, I'm just going to pull up those verts. And now when I smooth it, now it looks like our rope, which is kind of what we want. So we've got that effect going for us. And the top of the rope kind of looks a little too smooth. It looks a little too gummy. So we're going to need to go in and add some edge loops to that, so that we have something of a harder edge on the outside. So just to test it out, we can throw a bend modifier on there and, bend our shape. And you guys know the process for this already. You just add the angle, add the direction, and then just figure out which way it needs to bend. And if it's not bending appropriately, then you know that your gizmo is not facing the right orientation. All right, so there's a few ways you can solve this. All right, so when my gizmo is off, that means I'm going to get the wrong angle no matter what. So what I'm going to need to do is either rotate my gizmo and then place it back in the middle so that it bends in the correct direction whenever. Because right now it's bending in the y-axis properly. That's what it's supposed to be doing, but we want it to be bending left to right rather than front to back. So I tried it the first way, which is just turning the object and that did not give me the desired result that I wanted. So I decided, well, that's not going to work, and I go back and I instead rotate the gizmo, which is the much better way to do this, because now the way our rope is oriented, it doesn't match the silhouette of our reference. And that's very important, is you want it to match the silhouette of your reference. So I'm just gonna go and I'm just gonna cut this this blend out for the most part, and kind of regroup and try to get it properly. So the first thing to do is just kind of rotate it back to the way it's supposed to be. So it's supposed to be at 90 that way, and we want it to turn in that angle. So now we can go back and throw on our bend modifier and then just rotate that gizmo around to get what we're looking for. So you can always, whatever stack you're selected on, or whatever modifier stack you selected, you can usually throw different modifiers in between or on top, or under, or whatever you need to. You just got to be careful to know what that modifier is going to do to that object before you go ahead and collapse it in there. So now I'm going to throw my my bend modifier on there and give it like the 90-degree direction, and let's see if it's going to bend the way we want it to. So what I did now is, like I said, I'm going to grab my gizmo itself, and that's what I'm going to turn instead of turning my object. And once you do that, you should get the bend in the right direction. So now you just want to bend it to the right direction, all right? And right now the top of our it's not really matching, so we need to make our object a wee bit taller, just a wee bit taller. So there's a few ways we can do that. We can just scale it up that way, or scale it up on the z-axis so that we get something a little bit longer. All right, and I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to grab my z-axis and I'm just going to scale it in, and trying to move it in place. And like all these pictures, I said there's probably a little bit of perspective warp going on in them, so you can take that with a grain of salt for sure. You can take that with a grain of salt. So that's exactly what I did, is I just scaled it up, brought it back in so that, I'd have the same shape, the same number of ridges on the rope, because that doesn't change. But I just need it to be taller so that it can wrap around a little better. So now let's hit our turbo smooth and turn on the bend to see how everything's kind of working out. So now it's looking a little bit better, and you can definitely, if you hit 1 on your keyboard, you can definitely affect the gizmo as well. Grab the gizmo, move it around to make sure that you're getting it in the right position. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, do what I talked about earlier, which is add an edge loop to the top of this, which is going to give us a harder edge, because it's kind of it's losing that shape at the last ridge where it looks like it's cut. Ours is looking a little too soft, and we want to match that as much as possible. So right there, now we've got that harder edge, and now we can throw back our modifier, our bend modifier back on, and we can call this bad boy done. The only thing left to do at this point is to move it kind of in place a little bit more. Just move it in place, move the object in place, move it in place, and mirror it to the other side. So it's going to take a bit of finagling to kind of get it to bend right and be in the right position. So, I'm just going to leave you guys to that to get the best position for it.